Hello everyone, Thersites the Historian here. I just got done watching the second half of the second Democratic presidential debate, and I am here to offer up my observations and analysis. Unlike last time, I will be ranking all of the Democratic candidates from 10 to 1 based on how well or how poorly they performed. Their ranking in this order does not necessarily mean that I'm predicting that this will determine how well they do going forward. However, debates are important in primaries, and this is how lesser-known candidates can break out or emerge in some way. For bigger candidates, though, this is not necessarily fatal if they did a crappy job. So, what we'll do is rank them that way, and then we'll come back at the end and combine the results of tonight with the results of last night and try to speculate on who will make it into the next debate in September and how high their stock will be going into that debate. Of course, there are some unknown and unknowable factors since we have about a month before that debate, but you know what? It's not a fun prediction video unless there's a little bit of risk and a little bit of unknown involved. So let's get started with our big loser for tonight. Coming in dead last at the number 10 spot is the junior senator from New York, Kirsten Gillibrand. While she did not take the most abuse in this debate, every time she spoke was painful and counterproductive. She really shit the bed profoundly. She began by making an appeal to women, which I believe is how she ended the first debate. She said the word women in one sentence literally 3 or 4 times at one point. Gillibrand was trying to run a bad parody of the Hillary Clinton 2016 campaign. Hillary famously made a huge deal out of being a woman, but she did, to her credit, occasionally talk about other things, or at least when she was forced to. Gillibrand didn't even try. She just said, women, 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 I'm a woman, I like women, I'm for women, let's talk to women. At one point, she said that we should vote for her and she's electable because she can go to suburban, you guessed it, women, and tell them about white privilege. So she wanted to repeat her pathetic performance where she went before a bunch of blue-collar white workers and told them about their white privilege. She wants to be a millionaire who tells poor people that they need to stop being so damn privileged. Just totally pathetic and horrible. In the debate itself, she also tried to do a grandstand and she face-planted horrifically. Now, Biden was an open target all night, and he was pretty hit or miss with his defenses. However, there was one attack that he parried and did so deftly, and that was the attack from Gillibrand. In true neoliberal fashion, in true language policing fashion, rather than talking about Biden's voting record, she instead brought up something that he had written at some unknown point in the past, I'm guessing 1970s, which said something to the effect that women should stay in the home because if they leave the home, they're abandoning their motherly duties. And she talked about how personally offended she was by this. Biden just pointed out all the things that he's done for women, and he got more applause than she did. She basically got crickets. And that put the fork in her night. She was already doing poorly and not really saying much that anybody gave a shit about, and then she actually breathed life back into Biden. If not for her failed attack on Biden, my perception of how well he did would be drastically different, actually. So she really did nothing more than help Biden by being so terrible. Because although he was pretty bad, by comparison, he looked pretty decent. So that was really the only significance of Gillibrand in tonight's debate. And honestly, I think that we can go ahead and put a fork in her. No prediction that I've ever made on this channel has ever been more wrong than my early prediction that Gillibrand would be a player in this race. I have to admit, I called that one completely wrong. I must have fallen prey on some level to all of the editorials praising her political savvy, but the truth is she doesn't have any kind of savvy. She is a terrible politician. And I normally don't make direct calls for political action, but if you are a New Yorker and you think you could win a Senate seat, you should strongly consider trying to primary Kirsten Gillibrand. She's vulnerable and she is completely useless, so let's get rid of her and end our collective misery at having to hear her flail around and engage in the most pathetically horrible version of identity politics, one that doesn't advance anyone's interest and which is clearly and blatantly a distraction from her complete lack of substance. Coming in at ninth place is Kamala Harris. Harris is someone who in the first debate gave off the impression that she is a strong debater and that her performances would be something to be wary of. However, in this debate, she was nothing like she was in the first one. So she clearly has a consistency issue when it comes to showing up for debates. Tonight, she started off as a Barack Obama imitator talking about the question of who are we. She tried to be rhetorical and she tried to speak thematically. And it didn't work because that's not who she is. She just doesn't have the level of gravitas or charisma to carry that out, but she kept trying anyway. She tried to pivot from being an attack dog to being presidential, and it turns out she doesn't have what it takes. When she ended, just to skip to the end, she then tried to mirror Hillary by talking about how Trump is a predator and Trump is shitty, and she's going to push a 3 a.m. agenda that will alleviate the fears and anxieties of Americans. So she combined two previous titans of the Democratic Party and really didn't capture the essence of either of them. And then there was some stuff in the middle. She didn't really have any standout moments. Early on, there was a debate between Biden and Harris over healthcare. Biden has his own Biden Care plan, and Harris now has shifted from Medicare for All to a system that is Medicare for All in 10 years, or I don't know what she called it, but it sounds somewhat convoluted and it seems like an unnecessary complication. And because of the weirdness of having a 10-year transition period, even Biden attacked her for being weak on the issue. She went on to say that Kathleen Sebelius, the former Health and Human Services Secretary, had endorsed the plan, and then Tulsi Gabbard emerged from nowhere to hammer her on that because Sebelius is working for one of the healthcare companies. Instead of defending against Tulsi, Harris decided to focus on Biden because she wanted to keep hitting the piñata like she had done in the first debate. So she kept hammering away and let that attack hit home. She didn't really manage to do any damage to Biden on that issue, really, at least not any more than he did to himself by adopting an unpopular viewpoint and trying to defend private insurance companies. Let's see, what else did Harris have to say? Oh, she brought up the busing and segregationist thing again. It worked for her in the first debate. Lightning did not strike twice. The audience didn't really respond. And it was one of the weaker attacks that Biden faced. Let's see. Yeah, she was a little bit forgettable, actually. Okay, one thing that she proposed that was pretty interesting and I think politically savvy, something that other candidates should think about, is that the Democrats should run on Trump as a betrayer of the working class. Trump's trade deals have not delivered on the kind of promise that he put forward during his campaign to really protect workers or to create new jobs here at home, at least high-paid manufacturing jobs. So her idea of running against Trump the betrayer is actually the smartest thing she said by a long shot. She also has a plan to make sure that women are paid as much as men by imposing a 1% fine to the profit of any company for every 1% difference in the pay between men and women who do the same job. And that's one of those kind of like oomphy plans that sounds powerful but would be really hard to enforce, since there are a whole lot of people who are now skeptics of the pay gap. And again, how would you enforce this? Let's be honest, the people who gave money to Kamala would never be fined for this, and this would be enforced super unevenly, if at all. So anyway, her appeal at the end was that she's a tough prosecutor and that Trump is a predator and needs to be stopped. Everybody in the party doesn't like Trump, but I don't think, based on her performance up to that point, that she had made the case that she would be the person to beat him. So I think that she will lose some standing from this. I don't think that it will flush her down the toilet by any means, but she lost much of what she gained in the first debate, and I think she's kind of back to where she started in June. If not, worse off, actually. Choosing between Castro and Biden for 8th place is a little bit difficult, but I think I'm going to give the nod to Cotton Eye Joe Biden. The vice president was under attack the entire time. And while he did take some hits to be sure, he did manage to defend himself rather competently on the whole. That being said, because he was so much on the defensive, he didn't really get to make a case for himself, even though he did land a few solid blows against some of his rivals. For the most part, the people who were attacking Biden were Booker, Castro, DeBlasio, Gillibrand, and Harris. Gabbard was mostly going after Harris. Inslee was mostly talking about the environment. Yang was talking about the UBI. And Bennet was kind of defending Biden, but mostly just trying to advance a centrist viewpoint and try to promote himself a little bit. So, in other words, Biden was on an island, and it would have been as if only Warren or only Sanders had been there last night to be on the receiving end of all of the irrelevant centrist hatred. So, yeah, Biden took a lot of hits. And because of that, he didn't really gain any progress. To look at some of the things he said specifically, one area where he definitely could have gained something but blew his opportunity was in his opening statement. He said some Marianne Williamson-esque thing about he wanted to restore the soul of the country and that Trump was destroying the social fabric of America. That's meaningless, and it was an opportunity missed, especially when DeBlasio attacked him in his opener and other candidates talked about their issues and things they cared about. So it was pretty bad for him. In his concluding remarks, he said that, again, battle for soul of America. He made a verbal slip up and said we can't afford 8 more years of Trump. He said that Trump is an aberration and that we can undo the damage. So he shows that he effectively doesn't understand or pretends not to understand why the Democrats lost last time. He wants to go back to business as usual. I don't know how well that will play with the base. So even though he did okay during the main action at defending himself, he missed his only 2 openings to actually say something positive and to really put out a message that makes sense. His campaign site is called something like Joe 3030, and I remember hearing that and thinking, what the fuck? That doesn't sound like a real website. It sounds like some old man reading of something where he read it wrong, or he just got a generic name from the company he bought the site from and he just stuck with it without changing it. He was the only person who couldn't competently tell people to go to his website, and I think that just plays into a lot of people's perception that he's old and his mode of politics is antiquated. To get into some of the Biden substance, or what passes for it, he has a health care plan which he claims will be cheaper than Medicare for All. It will only cost $750 billion as opposed to $32 trillion. That being said, he did admit that it would cost in the neighborhood of $1,000 for copay. There would be a limit of $1,000 on copays. Now, while it sounds good to have a limit on copays, the thing is that is still not all that great. You would still have to fork out $1,000 when you had to go to, say, the hospital. And a lot of people still can't afford that. So it's really not a big improvement on Obamacare. He also came off as very peevish at times. Now, DeBlasio is a loud New York troll. And DeBlasio was being obnoxious at times, at least to Biden. I mean, I found it entertaining, but I could definitely understand why it would be annoying to Biden, since DeBlasio is, like I said, a complete troll. But Biden effectively said something like, well, unlike you, I keep my private conversations private. So he's effectively attacking de Blasio's character. Now, sure, de Blasio is kind of known as being a bit of a piece of shit, but if you're trying to come off as presidential and even-handed, and you're trying to come off as even-keeled, going after somebody in that way kind of undermines what you're trying to do. So I don't feel like he came off as all that strong when it came time for him to actually do anything positive. But he did deflect some of the major criticisms, although he still took a few body blows from Booker and Harris. Coming in the 7th slot is Julian Castro. The best thing that you can say about Castro's performance is that it was forgettable. The worst thing that you could say about it is that it was forgettable and that he needed to make an impact of some kind. In the first debate, he did fairly well, although at the end he was outshone by Tulsi Gabbard with her exchange with Tim Ryan. This time, he didn't really have a standout moment. He tried to spar with Biden over the border, as I mentioned, but I think that he actually lost that exchange, as I explained in my take on Biden just a moment ago. Castro's farewell of the night was just that we need to say adios to Trump. That was pretty lame. His intro was lame, and he didn't really do a whole hell of a lot. I do have to put him above Biden, however, because he faced less scrutiny and he didn't have a train run on him in front of an entire audience. Castro also tried to suck off the moderators at the last part of the debate by thanking them for their conduct and whatever. I found it a little bit pathetic and pandering, but it was a savvy move, because what that means is that a lot of the editorial writers who feel like politicians should never criticize them will think that Castro is a pretty cool dude and that maybe he did a little better than we think he did. Castro did say one wise thing during this debate when it came to political strategy, and it shows that he, like Harris, while he's terrible, does have some comprehension of strategy. He said that if you want to campaign against Trump under a strong economy, what you have to do is point out that the economy does not work for everyone and that inequality and suffering are still very real. So, kudos to him for that one thing, and just by that virtue of having that one thing and taking less damage, I have to put him above Biden. That being said, this is not something that moves the needle at all for Castro, and he is once again completely irrelevant. Coming in at number 6, I have Colorado Senator Michael Bennet, also known as the world's best unintentional Mr. Mackey impersonator. Michael Bennet is a pretty boring candidate. He is one of several white guys with brown hair who are centrist Democrats and who oppose socialism. That being said, I think that he may have cemented his place as the best and most likable of that crowd. The only competitor for that title would be Steve Bullock, who the best thing you can say about him is that he kind of looks like a young Randy Quaid. But at any rate, Michael Bennet, Mr. Mackey, did come off as at least pleasant for the most part. At one point, Kamala Harris tried to recreate the magic of Elizabeth Warren's attack on John Delaney when Bennet was going after her health care plan from the right. She said very tepidly that he was using right-wing talking points, but it didn't have the same resonance as when Warren said it to Delaney. Part of that is because Warren is more charming. She has like this kind of goofy charm that's fun, and Kamala doesn't. She's fake. The other factor is that Bennet, while he was using points that were not entirely honest or straightforward, did not sound unpleasant, and he wasn't being a complete asshole the way that Delaney was. So Harris showed that she doesn't know how to recreate someone else's moment, and it fell flat. It actually sounded like a cheap shot at Bennet, and I think that actually helped him and made him sound more reasonable since he didn't deign to respond to it. Bennett's big pitch at the end was nothing to talk about. It was a boring closer. Had he just had a closer of some kind, I would have put him in the 5 spot. And that's because I think he's competing for that coveted role of being a brown-haired, boring white dude who is a centrist. And like I said, I think he's leading the pack in that regard, but he's got a little bit of work to do. Bullock is still out there somewhere, so I guess that will be his challenge. One thing Bennet did say that sets him apart from the other guys who are identical to him is that we should reinvest all the money that we're wasting in foreign wars here at home. That was something that a lot of candidates have said, but he was the only one of the boring centrists who said it. So I think that he actually advanced his cause a little bit, but we have to understand that his cause is a pretty pathetic one, and that his slight advancement of his status is most likely irrelevant and will not be reflected in any polls. Coming in at the number 5 spot in the dead center of this pack is someone who represents the dead center of corporate consensus politics, the senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker. I like to think of Booker as the corporate hooker. It helps me remember his name. Booker did better than I initially thought. I must confess I have a very strong dislike of Cory Booker, and it is painful for me to have to listen to him speak because of how disingenuous he is, and the crocodile tears that he sheds at times and grandstanding is truly sickening and repugnant. He did have some good moments in this debate, and by good moments I actually mean just one good moment that made him better than the people I've listed before. The big thing that happened for him is that he got into it with Biden on the crime bills, and he actually delivered the biggest blow to Biden of anyone who went after him, which is surprising because Booker is not known as a smart guy, and usually your intelligence helps or harms you in a debate. But despite not being anywhere near the smartest guy on the stage, he did manage to be quick on his feet and charming this one time. They were debating over the impact of Biden's crime bills on the streets, and Booker famously comes from Newark, New Jersey, and still lives in a poor neighborhood, so he actually sees the conditions on the streets on a regular basis. Biden was saying that his bills actually made things better and didn't have any negative impacts, but Booker fired back and said that Biden was dipping into Kool-Aid and you don't know the flavor. I guess that was about as cool as Cory Booker could ever be, so this was playing into his hand. It made him look like an actual human and not just like a corporate puppet. So yeah, just by that one little moment alone, which got some applause and sounded cool, it'll be replayed, that puts him above Castro and probably also above Bennet, who didn't have any real moments. So, yeah, good for Booker, I guess. He doesn't really gain or lose from this debate. He just had that one moment, but his main significance was simply striking a blow against Joe Biden and helping Biden out and having a really terrible night overall. So, yeah, Booker did more to hurt Biden than to help himself. But because Biden is so high in the polls, that is still an impactful thing to do. So congratulations, Cory, for having your one semi-witty moment in life. It will probably never happen again. Savor this moment and earmark that clip on YouTube. For the number 4 spot, I have to once again remind my audience that we are judging based on debate performance more than, say, how much someone actually helped themselves in a measurable way. Therefore, the 4th spot goes to Bill DeBlasio. He could have even been higher if not for his lack of personal credibility, which limits the effectiveness of anything that he says. He talks a very good game and does so consistently, but he's too well known at this point for anyone to take him seriously, and everybody knows that he is a huckster. He made some good points in the debate, however, and I will share a few of them. In his closer, he said that Trump uses class division, and if the Democrats want to overcome that, they have to be the party of labor unions, universal health care, and taxing the hell out of the wealthy. He said that Trump will call the Democrats socialists, and they should respond by pointing out that his policies are socialism for the rich. We should put workers first. He also put out a call to workers in his intro, and it sounded vaguely like the end of the Communist Manifesto. De Blasio's record does not suggest that he believes any of this, but I think that he does kind of point to some real things that Democrats should consider. It's a good thing, however, that no one takes him too seriously, and that it seems like most voters are kind of aware that he is in fact a troll and may very well be a plant on the progressive side. De Blasio did take a hit on the officer Pantelio, or whatever his name is, the guy who choked out Michael Brown. There were protesters present at the debate, so that's obviously not a good look if there are protesters there for you. If that's the main thing that stands out, never a good sign. But otherwise, made some pretty good points. He also talked about how we need to implement lead-free water delivery systems in every city in America. He had done it in New York, so this was something that worked in his favor. Um, he talked well about healthcare and Medicare for all, although he didn't say a lot. He just kind of criticized Biden and Harris, who were kind of waffling and looked pretty damn bad. So yeah, he did all right, but there was nothing in his performance that really changed the game or would have convinced anybody that he's legitimate. So yeah, he did well-ish, but he's Bill DeBlasio, so it doesn't matter. Now that we have dispensed with 7 unnecessary candidates, let's get on to talk about the 3 people who actually advanced their cause in some way during this debate. In the number 3 spot, we have Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington. With Inslee, his main thing is and always has been environmental policy. I have already read some early write-ups of this debate where he was basically pegged as a single-issue candidate who only talks about climate change and has nothing else to say. However, that was not the impression that I got. Every time Inslee was asked to speak, he was able to point to accomplishments in his own state, and no one was able to shoot him down on that. No one was able to point out any deficiencies in Washington state, and that would, you think, help him quite a bit. Of all the candidates, including the 2 candidates who I think won more from this debate than he did, he was the most consistent. And by consistency, I just mean that throughout the debate, he was strong. He didn't have any lulls. That being said, he also didn't have any home run moments. He had no zingers. He landed no blows, really. But he was never weak, and he always had an answer that contained substance. So personally, I thought that he did well, but I can't rank him any higher than 3 simply because I've seen other candidates in the past who give good answers but don't resonate because they don't have charisma. The person who comes to mind is Martin O'Malley. I remember watching the first debate back in 2016 and thinking that he might actually have a shot because he actually gave good answers. Now, granted, I knew that his record was actually crap, but I thought that his performance would be strong enough to carry him beyond that, and it wasn't. So I think that Inslee, if you were just doing this on a point system and you were rewarding people for staying substantive the whole time, he would be the clear winner of this debate. But because he doesn't have much charisma, I just can't see him really getting all that much out of this debate. That being said, he had some good points here and there and didn't make any mistakes. So I think that he did advance his cause some, and it's possible that one of the candidates who does better will call him one day to be a running mate. Based on the first debate and how many ads she's been running lately, plus her aggressive stance toward Kamala Harris and the media, I figured that tonight would be Tulsi's night. I was kind of right, but not really. I give her the number 2 spot. Gabbard had a very uneven performance, but she did have her moments. Her opener about patriotism was full of purple prose. She talked about service, equality, and it was just very generic and boring, and I wasn't feeling it at all. It evoked none of the positive feelings that Tulsi tends to evoke when she usually speaks. She's capable of being very charismatic when she wants to be, and I got none of that out of her opener. As the debate went forward, however, she began to land some blows. During the healthcare debate, she hit Harris's 10-year installation plan for Medicare for All by attacking Sebelius's links with a health insurance company. And that was really where Harris started to fall apart. Harris knew that Gabbard would come after her, and she knew that if she went back after Gabbard that it wasn't going to go well for her. So for the most part, she was very careful about not counterpunching at Gabbard. All that Harris would defend herself with when she was talking about her record as a prosecutor is that she was actually a prosecutor where everyone else wasn't, and they don't know what it's like. All they're doing is delivering speeches. Tulsi had an opening to fire back and go back to that commander-in-chief point that she was making on Twitter or wherever it was, where she said that Kamala was not qualified to be commander-in-chief. But she didn't. That was an opportunity missed, not a big one though. Tulsi did manage to point out all of the many failings in Kamala Harris's term as Attorney General of California. And I think that of all the candidates there, Tulsi is the one who wrecked Kamala's night. Now, Kamala was not doing so hot to begin with, but Tulsi really wrecked her. So because of that alone, Tulsi was very impactful. The takedown of Biden involved a whole lot of people, but Tulsi single-handedly wrecked Kamala. So in that sense, she had the most impact on the night as a whole, since she took down someone that I think a lot of people thought was going to win the whole thing. And she did some favors for herself, but nothing too crazy. She continued to talk about reinvesting in America after we bring the troops home. She also talked about fair trade and the problems with TPP. TPP was introduced into this debate, by the way, after John Delaney, of all people, brought it up last time. So the least impactful and most hated candidate of the last debate was the only person who managed to get an issue injected into this debate. I want you to think about that. Anyway, though, Tulsi mostly did a good job talking about how we need fair trade. We don't need to give away our sovereignty. We need to create jobs here. We need to make sure we protect our environment. And she also talked about how the TPP, the main problem with it is that there would be this corporate board which could impose rulings on constituent nations and sue for loss of expected profits. So Tulsi was totally on point with that, and it was probably a somewhat out of right field or right-wing field question. So I'm surprised that she was so well prepared for it, but again, that was excellent. When she closed, she was a little weak. She said we need to end the chaos of the Trump presidency. He's clearly unstable when it comes to dealing with our foreign affairs. We need to end foreign wars. We need to reinvest the money here at home. We need to spend money on health care. I think she's for Medicare for all, but she didn't really bring it up, and she wasn't called on to talk about it. Had she been, then I think she could have made a case for a complete package tonight, but that was the main thing that was missing from her array of issues, at least tonight. So she did really well, but she could have been better, and I think that the main flaw in her performance was the piss-poor opening. Because actually after watching that opening, I was pretty sure she was done a face plant, and that when I made this video, I'd be talking about her in 9th or 10th place. But she managed to rally and have a strong showing overall. During the first round of debates back in June, I was stunned at how poorly Andrew Yang did. I had expected him to do much better since I had seen him display charm and wit in many of his interviews, and I knew that he was a smart guy who has a lot of ideas. In this debate, when I saw him come out on stage, I saw a bit of pep in his step, and I thought, something might be about to happen. And yeah, Andrew Yang came out blazing. He is the clear winner of tonight's debate. I don't think there's any question that it doesn't matter how you feel about Yang or his policies. He clearly won this debate, and I don't really think that there's any room for argument on that point. Let's begin with his opening. He came out, he said, "I'm the guy who's for $1,000 a month. You may have heard of that. That would be me. Trump's worst nightmare is an Asian man who likes math. And automation is a major problem in America, something that's not being talked about enough, and it's ultimately why Trump is president." He laid out a clear-cut case, and he stuck with it the entire night. Every question he would deflect to talk about the UBI, or as he calls it, the freedom dividend. While he's someone who has a lot of issues that he stands for, the UBI is something that he hammers home over and over. Now, he was not asked to speak very often, but he did make use of his time really well. Somewhat comparable to what Marianne Williamson did last night, although I think because Yang has that one signature policy piece that's so powerful, it's much more impactful than what Marianne did in the previous night. So, like I said, Yang did not have all that much speaking time, but he did manage to get in the UBI point several times. When he was asked about the crime bill issue after Booker laid the smackdown on Biden, he said that one thing we need to think about is we might want to give people money, say like a UBI, and if they have that UBI, then they're less likely to commit crime and end up in jail in the first place, and it might actually be cheaper to just give them money than to put them in jail. So He managed to make that point over and over. That being said, my only real objection to him taking everything back to the UBI is that it does make him sound like a single issue, one note pony, and that could be a problem. But I think right now what he needed to do was really get his name out there and get up in the polls enough to survive, and I'm pretty sure he was able to do that tonight. On the issue of global warming and climate change, he basically said that we're fucked when it comes to the coastal areas and we need to evacuate. He might be right about that. However, in the context of this primary fight, Democrats always favor optimist over pessimist, and Yang sounded pretty pessimistic. So I think that that was probably something that cooled people on him, especially people who live in coastal areas and who would think that a Yang administration might abandon them. I guarantee you if he goes forward, this will be brought back up and used against him by whoever is in that final class of people. So let's see. He also talked about the $1,000 a month when he was asked about the gender pay gap. And he did say he really wants to end all the wars, de-escalate tensions, and reinvest at home. That was basically the Tulsi Gabbard line. I think she did it better, but at least he was on the side that most of the party is on, so that helps him. At that point, he had done well, but I wasn't sure if he was going to be first place or not. There was still a case to be made for Tulsi and Inslee going into the closing remarks. And mostly that's because, as I said, Yang had, I think, by far the least speaking time. But then he hit the home run. His closer was by far the best closer of anyone in this series of debates, both including the ones in June and the ones over the last two nights. He basically said, look, the last time I showed up for the debate, the media spent way more time talking about me not wearing a tie, and he was visibly not wearing a tie, so it showed that he thought the criticism was stupid, rather than talking about the issues. This whole thing is a reality TV show. It's complete nonsense, and that's how we got a reality star as president. We need to focus on real issues, like jobs going away due to automation, and we need to give people $1,000 a month in order to offset the problems of automation. So he closed with a very strong appeal to his main issue, while also saying something about the media that everyone understands to be true. Earlier, he also said something about how he appeals to a broad spectrum of people. And he made a more convincing case for putting together a coalition than, say, Gillibrand, who said, I could appeal to suburban moms who have white guilt. So Yang far and away won this one. I don't know how much it will actually help him in the long run, because I think that he did sow some seeds that could come back to haunt him. But I'm pretty sure he just secured himself a spot in the September debates. And while we're talking about the September debates, let's talk about the overall winners of the last two nights of debates and who will be showing up in September. So the candidates who went tonight had an advantage of knowing how the first batch of candidates did, and they had the chance to really impact how those candidates are perceived. But rather than harming any of the people who went last night, tonight's debate helped the first batch of candidates. I would say that Pete Buttigieg actually benefited from tonight's debate, and that his stock rose a little bit more, putting him clearly in the winner category for the two nights combined. The reason I say that is because as a centrist, Buttigieg looked pretty good in the first debate. He didn't really do anything spectacular, but he was solid. And then in the second debate, the main centrist like Harris and Biden looked like shit. So this made Buttigieg, who is a clear third option for the corporate establishment, look a lot better. So you could actually argue, just because of that and because of how candidates are clearly looking for a clear plank to victory, that Buttigieg is actually the biggest overall winner. In time, that may prove to be the case. I don't think it will be, but it's a possibility, something to think about. The biggest winners of the debates in terms of if you combine what happened at both debates, and it's easy to some extent since they use the same questions, I think that Bernie and Warren are still the clear number one and number two winners of this series of debates. They both had good name recognition coming in. There were some questions about their policies. They successfully defended a whole array of policies against all comers, and they were largely untouched tonight because of how well they did in that initial defense. That made all the attacks more or less go against Biden. Now, I heard some of the centrists bring up the name of Bernie, but the attacks were pretty half-hearted and not at all effective. And third place, Andrew Yang. He had a really good performance, and I think that in relative terms, he gained the most, since he was starting out with like 2%, and I think he's clearly going to go above 2% now because of that strong finish. But in absolute terms, he will not be taking the lead by September by any stretch of the imagination, and I imagine he'll actually be in around 6th place by the time that the debates come around, maybe 5th or 4th, but probably not higher than that. Another thing about Yang is a lot of people really like that weird little thing he does with his hands, not left, not right, but forward. I personally find it cringe as fuck. What do you guys think? I don't know. Am I just being weird about that? It seems like most people like it, but I find it really cringy, and I think he should come up with a new slogan, something that sounds less stupid. But anyway, yeah, I think Williamson will make the cut. She has stuff to say, and she has some charisma. She's interesting. She's a little crazy, but she's interesting. And that's more than you can say about a lot of these other people. So the people I have being in September for sure: Bernie, Warren, Biden, Harris, Buttigieg, Yang, and then likely but not certain Williamson. After that, somewhat likely Tulsi Gabbard. And then after that, I have Bennet. Because like I said, I think Bennet has won the boring, brown-haired, white centrist male slot. And I don't remember how many people were competing for that slot, but I think it was like 8. So clearly a coveted place in the Democratic constellation. Aside from that, there are 4 people who I think could get in the last available slot. Mike Gravel was actually invited to the series of debates. I was wrong about that in my last video. Somebody pointed that out. He chose not to attend because he wanted to debate Biden tonight rather than debating last night. He could possibly get into this one because he has a relatively strong following and a good social media presence. Jay Inslee, like I said, did pretty well tonight, and he might be able to win over enough environmentalists and gain their support, and they might be able to propel him somewhere. Julian Castro is someone who may be able to gain a real strong foothold in the Hispanic community, and if there's another immigration crisis or another Trump tweet storm about Hispanics being rapists or whatever, that might be enough to put him in the next debate. Cory Booker probably has the best chance because of his ties and his money, and the fact that the Democratic primaries are largely determined by black voters, and just by being black, he has some credibility automatically. But I think that it will be a 4-way race for that last spot. It's also possible that Bennet doesn't make it, or even that Tulsi Gabbard is not able to make it. Or actually, Williamson would be less likely than Gabbard now that I really think about it. But again, that's what I think will happen, so I'm looking forward to seeing that field shake out and seeing who manages to fill out the roster. Until next time, I'm Thersites the Historian, and maybe before we get to the next debates, I'll be able to give some biographical details about some of these other candidates I haven't covered in detail yet. Although, I have to be honest, I'm not all that eager to talk about John Delaney in detail. I just don't want to see him in a gimp mask. Anyway, next time we'll talk about the next debate. Until then, I'll be doing other stuff. Later.